You ever wake up to find a symbol of somebody else's power parked in your life, not metaphorically? I mean literally, a shiny Cadillac across the mouth of your garage with a little printed note tucked under the wiper like it belongs to the town square. And in the first 3 sentences you already know this day will be the kind you tell your grandkids about, if you survive telling it without laughing. That's how my Tuesday started in Willow Crest. My name's Sam Harper. I've lived on Larkspur Lane long enough to know the rhythms of the place. I plant my roses, I fix the odd roof for neighbors, I keep my dog off their manicured lawns, and then there's Martha, the HOA president, who treats bylaws like scripture and attention like oxygen. She decided to demonstrate authority that morning, slow-walked her Cadillac into my driveway, left a note that read like a summons, and stood back to let the neighborhood applaud. There's this little thing about pride and place. I always thought mine was the rose bed by the porch, the way it anchors me. Martha had other ideas. Her version of community standards included parking as a public sermon. The note was dry, the font official violation of ingrained parking ordinances, immediate remedial action required. She smirked when she saw me, clipboard in hand, sunglasses like she was on a courthouse steps, and the crowd of neighbors that had gathered were less an audience and more witnesses in a slow-motion execution of small-town humiliation. I remember breathing in the morning air, tasting the cold, thinking, okay, you can write a check, you can call my name loud enough to make me flinch, but you can't buy the truth of how I got here. I tried the obvious first. I knocked on her window, asked politely for the car to be moved. She told me, with that clipped, practiced patience of people who govern parking and human dignity in equal measure, that she had errands, that 5 minutes would be inconvenient. I suggested we call the police if she had time constraints. She smiled like a woman who'd read the manual and knew all the loopholes. Someone behind Martha, a neighbor I'd watered the hydrangeas for, muttered that the police would call it a civil matter, and that's when the gulf opened. You expect the law to be a straight thing, neutral, but sometimes law bends toward whoever shows up with a louder ego and a prettier car. I could have walked away. That would have been the safe, boring route, but there's a part of you that yanks up when your life becomes someone else's theater. What followed was less fireworks and more a series of small, deliberate breaks being released. I called my old friend Tommy not to talk trash, but because Tommy flies heavy lifts for a living, he keeps weird hours, and we used to drink coffee between cargo runs. I told him about the car, the note, Martha's smirk. He laughed, like you do when someone suggests the impossible, and then he didn't. Instead, he asked the kind of questions pilots ask: logistics, witnesses, legal exposure. I started gathering evidence the way somebody might gather kindling photos of the car blocking my garage, the note on my table, timestamps, neighbor statements. I didn't say, we're going to lift a car into the sky. I said, I want to make sure I'm not the crazy one when this is over. There's an art to letting your enemy think they've already won. I acted small in the neighborhood meetings, nodded, signed, told my roses I'd move them if that's what the committee wanted, all while lining up witnesses, talking to a friend of a lawyer over beers who said, trespass is trespass, you can't just park that way. I ceded the plan to a small group of neighbors who'd privately complained about Martha for years, the quiet ones who'd smile at potlucks and grit their teeth when she read rules off a laminated card. We were a collection of ordinary people with a single, almost embarrassingly petty grievance: a car in a driveway, and that made the stakes clearer. This wasn't about dramatic revenge. It was about refusing to be bent. Then came a morning I'll never forget. Fog low, dew on the lawns, and the distant beat a helicopter. When it arrives in a suburban setting, everything pauses. Laundry flutters like flags, dogs stop mid-bark, phones come out. Tommy's crew sat down in the empty park 2 blocks away, engineers walking with straps and chains. I felt ridiculous and a little ashamed as I watched them connect to Martha's Cadillac, the chains hugging the chrome like a makeshift crown. She was in full outrage mode, her voice thin and high, calling lawyers by name. The crowd had gathered, cameras were up, and for a beat I saw the truth. People love a good spectacle when the tyrant is forced to play a different role. Tommy yelled up to the pilot like it was some movie, "We're clear," and the rotors pushed air like a living thing, pushing leaves across lawns, setting the kettle lids and the geraniums trembling. The car rose like a bad idea taking flight, and I remember the surreal, private relief flooding me, not triumph, but a strange cleansing. Martha was screaming, calling me names that would make a sailor blush, but it was muffled down there, tiny and impotent. We flew the car, absurd and glinting, across town not because we wanted to hurt anyone, but because we needed the message to be unmistakable. Small tyrannies have big consequences when a neighborhood decides to act. Mayor Benson had always been the kind of man who liked a quiet life and prettier lawns. He loved his Sunday brunches on the town green. That day, the Cadillac landed, improbably and perfectly, on his front lawn mid-brunch. Plates clattered, and someone shouted like a cartoon. The mayor sat up like a man who'd been called out of a dream. Social media did the rest. The clip went live within minutes. Everyone with a phone narrating the fall of a petty god. For me, watching the camera angles and the way neighbors laughed and gasped, it felt less like a prank and more like a cleansing. The kind you get with a hard, cold winter wind that strips the dead branches from a hedgerow. The fallout came quick and clean. HOA meetings that used to be procedural rituals turned into tribunals. Friends I hadn't seen in years volunteered statements about Martha's petty fines and her way of dangling authority. The board convened, the minutes filled fast, and by the end of the week she was stripped of the presidency not just because of one parking incident, but because for once people shouted when the rules bent too far. There were legal letters, threats that would have cost me money in a different life, but the community's voice made it harder to press. The mayor, who'd once smiled at her at cocktail parties, had to answer cameras about what kind of leadership allows public shaming to become a hobby. I won't lie and say I felt nothing. Revenge tastes like both sweet and sour. There's a weight to the idea you orchestrated someone's humiliation. I replayed the moments where I could have walked away, or called a mediator, or simply kept my roses and my pride split inside. But watching neighbors who'd been quiet for years stand in support, seeing the kid next door point to the news clip and say, "They did that for you, Mr. Sam," those were the parts that mattered. It wasn't just about me. It became about the idea that a community could refuse to be governed by petty fear. There's a scene I still see clear as the sky that morning. Martha, sitting on a low wall after the meetings, the color gone from her cheeks, hands shaking, and she looked at me when no one else did, and I walked over. She tried, in that moment, the old move's apology like a transaction, explanation like a defense. I didn't gloat. I didn't spit the dramatic line people expect in films. I said, quietly, "This could have been different. So could you." She nodded, and somewhere between anger and exhaustion, I felt the iron of my own choices cool. We cleaned up what we could. The car later towed, the mayor's lawn mended, the roses pruned back beneath the porch. That's the point I hope people take away. It's not that dramatic acts are always right. It's that sometimes ordinary people find the courage to push back, to make sure the rules are fair for everyone, and to expose what happens when someone uses process as a weapon. So what's the takeaway? I don't pretend this was a moral victory wrapped in sunshine. Revenge is messy, accountability is complicated, and the law is a slow, sticky thing. But I do know this. When people gather quietly, share facts, and act with purpose, even if their action looks, to some, like a bit of theater, they can change a neighborhood. They can make bylaws mean something again. They can show a Martha that being loud isn't the same as being right. If you were in my shoes, if your driveway was blocked by someone flaunting power, what would you do? Do you think the helicopter stunt was justice or overreach?